Emily Waters glanced at her phone as soon as it buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from her husband, Michael, who'd been out of town on business for a few days. She swiped to unlock the screen and read his message, "Finished here. I'm on my way back. Dinner reservations are set for 7 p.m. at Mario's. See you there. Happy anniversary." There were no affectionate words or playful emojis to soften the message. That didn't catch Emily off guard, though. Lately, Michael's messages had been curt and to the point, as if his mind were elsewhere. Emily quickly typed back, "See you. Happy anniversary. Love you." Hitting send, she didn't expect much of a response. Still, she left the phone on the nightstand, watching it for a moment, hoping for something. Anything. But the screen stayed dark. With a glance at the clock, Emily realized she had just enough time to get ready before meeting Michael. She sighed, pushing herself off the bed, and headed toward the adjoining bathroom to freshen up. "Who was that?" came Brian Carter's voice, breaking the stillness. He was sitting up in bed, looking entirely too comfortable for someone who shouldn't have been there. "My husband," Emily replied simply, her tone even. "He's letting me know he's on his way back. He's already made reservations for Mario's tonight. It's our 5th anniversary." "5th anniversary, huh?" Brian raised an eyebrow, smirking. "I thought you said he was back east." "He was," she confirmed, crossing her arms. "Looks like he wrapped things up early. I'll need to call my mom and ask her to keep an eye on Ethan for a bit longer." Brian stretched lazily, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Go ahead and make your call, then come back to bed. Maybe we can give Michael a little gift before you go." Emily rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. "I'd love to, Brian, but I really need to clean up, and time's not on my side. Luckily, I've got fresh clothes here, so I won't have to stop at home first. Showing up in these would be a dead giveaway." She gestured to her wrinkled and stained outfit from the day. "You think he knows about us?" Brian asked, his voice quieter now, a hint of seriousness creeping in. Emily shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "No, I don't think so. He's been so preoccupied lately, like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. He hardly talks to me, and he doesn't spend much time with Ethan. It's like he's in his own bubble." "How long do you plan on keeping this up?" Brian's question lingered in the air. Emily shrugged, noncommittal. "It's hard to say. He's a good provider. And I know, deep down, he'd be an amazing dad if he'd just put in the effort." "You think he suspects Ethan isn't his?" Brian pressed. "If he does, he hasn't said a word about it," Emily replied, her tone firm. "I can't imagine him ignoring something that big. He'd have brought it up by now." Brian gave her a lazy smile, his eyes glinting mischievously. "Well, if you need anything, you know I'm here for you." Emily couldn't help but laugh at his boldness, her eyes flicking downward for a moment. "Just keep that warm for me, okay?" she teased, her grin turning wicked. "You got it, baby," Brian replied, matching her grin. Stepping into the closet, Emily surveyed the clothes hanging there, more than she cared to admit. She couldn't believe how much of her wardrobe had migrated to Brian's place, instead of staying in the closet she shared with Michael. She picked out a dress, holding it up for inspection. It was blue, hitting just above the knee, and showed off just enough cleavage to turn heads without being too obvious. As she stared at it, she tried to remember if Michael had ever seen her wear it. She was pretty sure he had, but if not, she'd just claim it was a new purchase. After a quick call to her mother to confirm she could watch Ethan a little longer, Emily headed into the bathroom for a long, hot shower. As the water cascaded over her, she scrubbed every inch of herself, determined to erase every trace of Brian before meeting Michael. Emily had made a promise to herself when she first started her affair with Brian Carter 16 months ago. she would never disrespect her husband, Michael, by giving him sloppy seconds. At the beginning, Brian had gone along with it, though he occasionally teased her about it. But ever since baby Ethan's arrival just over 3 months ago, Brian's teasing had turned into persistent suggestions. He'd started pressuring her to let Michael clean her out, as he crudely put it. Emily had shut him down every time. She found the idea not only disgusting but also a step too far. "It's bad enough I'm sleeping with you," she'd told him firmly, "and worse that I gave birth to your child. But I won't do that to him." After her shower, Emily stood in front of the mirror, brushing her long, dark hair until it gleamed. She took her time applying makeup, making sure she looked polished, perfect enough to pass whatever silent inspection Michael might give her. Satisfied with her reflection, she slipped into her blue dress and spritzed on just enough perfume to leave an impression without being overpowering. Leaning down, she pressed a kiss to Brian's lips. "Good night," she said, pulling back with a soft smile. "See you at the office tomorrow?" he asked, his eyes trailing over her as she straightened up. "Of course, lover," she replied, her tone light and teasing. "But tonight? Duty calls." With that, she grabbed her purse, flashed him one last smile, and sauntered out the door. Across town, Michael Waters sat in his Escalade, idly smoking a cigarette in the parking lot across from Mario's. His phone buzzed, pulling his attention away from the restaurant. It was a message from one of the private investigators he'd hired. The update came with a photo, Emily stepping out of the luxury condo owned by Brian Carter. She was wearing a blue dress, one Michael had never seen before. He frowned. It wasn't the same outfit she'd been wearing earlier when she entered Carter's place. Michael exhaled slowly, the smoke curling into the cool evening air. None of this surprised him. Emily thought he'd been back east, but the truth was, he'd returned the day before. His sudden homecoming hadn't been by choice. He'd been called into a meeting with a federal agency that officially didn't exist. The message was clear: Michael had a security breach, and it needed to be handled, immediately and quietly. If he didn't take care of it, they would. Michael still remembered how his stomach had churned as he sat in the office of the man known only as Alpha One. The one-eyed operative had an imposing presence, his movements deliberate, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You have a serious problem, Waters," Alpha One had said, his tone as unyielding as stone. "And when you have a problem, we all have a problem. Deal with it quietly, or I will." "Yes, sir," Michael had responded without hesitation. He knew that was the only acceptable answer. Alpha One wasn't a man to cross, the stories of his ruthless efficiency were legendary. Michael had even heard whispers of an entire beach estate being wiped off the map by a drone strike under Alpha One's orders. The thought sent a chill down Michael's spine. To Emily, Michael was just a salesman, traveling the country to pitch and install high-end security systems. And while that was technically true, it was far from the whole story. The equipment he sold was embedded with advanced circuitry, giving Alpha One's organization access to nearly everything about the companies he worked with, their operations, customer lists, financial dealings, everything. The security breach Alpha One had mentioned wasn't a hack or a system failure. It was Emily. Michael had been married to her for 5 years as of today. For the past year and a half, though, she'd been having a passionate affair with Brian Carter, a senior partner at the law firm where she worked as a paralegal. He hadn't known all the details at first. His frequent work trips had kept him in the dark, though he'd noticed small cracks forming in their relationship. By the time the pieces fell into place and he learned about the affair, Emily had dropped another bombshell: her pregnancy. Michael had consulted a lawyer not long after Emily announced her pregnancy. The advice wasn't what he wanted to hear. No judge in the state would even consider granting a divorce while Emily was expecting. If the child turned out to be his, Michael would still be on the hook for child support and possibly spousal maintenance, despite the prenuptial agreement they had signed before their wedding. At least the house wasn't up for grabs, it had been his long before they got married. For the next 9 months, Michael bit his tongue, keeping his suspicions and frustrations bottled up. It nearly drove him over the edge when Emily decided to name the baby Ethan, a name that clearly paid homage to the real father. The day Ethan was born, Michael demanded a DNA test. The results didn't shock him, the child wasn't his. Now, sitting in his Escalade across from Mario's, Michael checked his watch. Emily would be arriving any moment. He noticed a man in a khaki jacket standing by the restaurant's entrance, accompanied by a woman carrying a briefcase. That was his signal. Michael drove across the street, parked his vehicle, and grabbed his own briefcase before heading to the door. He nodded subtly to the pair as he passed and spoke quietly to the hostess. Within moments, he was seated in a discreet corner booth, while the khaki-clad man and his companion settled into another booth nearby, close enough to overhear everything. Michael ordered water from the waitress and pretended to study the menu. When Emily finally arrived, he set it down and stood as she slid gracefully into the seat across from him. "Good evening, Emily," he said, his tone calm and neutral. "You look very nice tonight." "Thank you, Michael," she replied with a smile. "I don't recall seeing that dress before. Is it new?" "Yeah," Emily said, brushing invisible lint off the fabric. "I just picked it up. Do you like it?" "Yes," he said, offering a slight smile. "It really brings out your eyes." They placed their orders and sat in an awkward silence for a moment before music drifted over from another part of the restaurant. Mario's wasn't just a dining spot, it had a dance floor and a cocktail lounge as well. "That sounds like our song," Emily said, her voice light and hopeful. Michael caught the unspoken request. What the hell, he thought. It was their anniversary, even if it would be their last. "Care to dance?" he asked, standing and offering his hand. "Don't mind if I do," Emily said, taking it with a playful smile. On the dance floor, they swayed to the music, but Emily couldn't ignore how Michael kept a noticeable distance between them. His touch felt distant, almost reluctant, as though he could barely tolerate her presence. When the song ended, Michael guided her back to their booth. Their food had already arrived, and they began eating in silence. "Is something wrong, Michael?" Emily asked finally, setting her fork down. "You seem off. This is supposed to be a special night." "Yes, it is," he replied, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin. "But here's the thing, your dress smells like it's been hanging in Brian Carter's closet for a while now. And no matter how hard you tried, you didn't quite manage to scrub his scent off your body." Emily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What?" she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "Brian Carter? Are you serious?" "Oh, I'm quite serious," Michael said, his tone deadly calm. "Brian Carter, the senior partner at your law firm. Surely you know him?" "Of course, I know him," she snapped, trying to sound dismissive. "Well, you should," Michael continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "You've spent enough time in his bed. And he happens to be little Ethan's biological father." Emily's jaw dropped. "What are you saying? That's outrageous. I will not sit here and let you speak to me like this." "Oh, you absolutely will," Michael said, his eyes narrowing as he reached for his briefcase. "You'll sit here and listen to every single thing I have to say. After what you've been doing for the past 16 months, you don't have much of a choice." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily said, her voice faltering as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Oh, but you do." Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a piece of paper, sliding it across the table to her. "Let's start with this." "What's this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Michael's expression remained unreadable as he replied, "That is the result of a DNA test I had done on Ethan. According to this, he's not my son." He slid the paper across the table toward her. And the sheet underneath? That's another DNA test proving that Ethan's biological father is none other than your lover, Brian Carter, the man you named him after. Emily's face paled, and she stammered, "How? How did you get Brian's DNA?" Michael let out a dry chuckle. "That was easy. You've been bringing it home with you at least 3 nights a week. But there's more." He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. "What's this?" Emily asked hesitantly, her eyes darting to the folder. "A copy of every email, text message, and DM you've exchanged with Brian over the last 16 months, Michael said coolly. "I hate to break it to you, Emily, but privacy on the internet is a thing of the past." Her lips trembled as she blurted out, "Okay, fine. I admit it. Brian and I fooled around once, but that was it. It didn't mean anything." "Not really. Is that so?" Michael asked, leaning forward. His voice was calm, but his eyes held an intensity that made Emily squirm. "Turn to page 75, about halfway down. Look for the highlighted section. Then tell me what you see." Reluctantly, Emily flipped through the pages, her hands shaking as she reached the one Michael mentioned. Her face turned ghostly white as her eyes scanned the highlighted passage. "Well?" Michael prompted, his voice sharp. "I'm waiting." "I'm reading it," Emily whispered, avoiding his gaze. Out loud, Michael demanded. "I want to hear you say the words you wrote to him." Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the paper. "Please," she begged. "Don't make me do this." "You either read it, or I will," Michael said flatly. "And if I read it, I promise you I won't care who hears." Sniffling, Emily looked back at the page. Tears streamed down her face as she finally began to read aloud. "I love what you do to me, Brian. I haven't felt so wonderfully satisfied as I have these last 16 months. I can't wait until you knock me up with another one of your babies. I love your Johnson, even more than Michael's. And I look forward to the next time you can fill me up." Michael's expression didn't change, but his words cut like a knife. "In all the years we've been married, I don't recall you ever speaking to me like that. Is this all you have?" Emily asked nervously, her voice barely audible. "No," Michael said, his tone colder now. "I have pictures, audio, and hours upon hours of video." Emily pushed her food around on her plate, her voice trembling as she said, "You must really hate me." Michael leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing. "Yes," he said simply. The word hit Emily like a slap. She looked up at him, her face crumpling in shock. "There was a time," Michael continued, his voice quiet but firm, "when I would have taken a bullet for you. Now? It's all I can do to keep from putting one in you myself." Her lips quivered as she asked, "How long have you known?" "I had my suspicions before you told me you were pregnant," Michael admitted. "So I started digging, collecting evidence. By the time I spoke to a lawyer, you dropped the pregnancy bombshell. The lawyer told me no judge would entertain a divorce until after the baby was born, child support and all that. But now that Ethan's here, I've got everything I need to make this official." He motioned subtly to the 2 people sitting nearby. The man in the khaki jacket and the woman with the briefcase stood and approached their table. The man stopped in front of Emily and spoke firmly. "Ms. Emily Waters?" "Yes," Emily replied quietly, her voice cracking. The man set a manila envelope in front of her. "You've been served." "Served?" Emily echoed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, served," Michael said, pulling a pen from his briefcase and handing it to her. "With divorce papers. Go ahead, look them over. You'll find they're exactly as we agreed in the prenup. Sign them now, and I'll give you a bank draft for $2,145, the same amount you had when we got married. Don't ask for more." I already know about your little slush fund. You can keep that, along with your retirement. Emily stared at him, stunned into silence. Michael continued, his voice unwavering. Your belongings have already been taken to your mother's house. Yes, she knows, and she's extremely disappointed in you. But she's agreed to let you stay with her until you can find a place of your own. For the boy's sake, not yours, Michael said coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. But I don't want a divorce, Emily pleaded, her voice cracking. I love you. Michael raised an eyebrow, his expression hardening. Please, Emily. Don't insult my intelligence. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. A moment later, her own voice filled the air. It was her conversation with Brian from earlier that day. Emily's eyes widened in shock. How did you get that? She asked, her voice trembling. Michael smirked, though there was no warmth in it. Well, I could tell you, he said, his tone turning icy, but then I'd really have to shoot you. And as much as I despise you right now, I don't think it'd be right to deprive little Ethan of his mother. Emily stared at him, her lips trembling. You used me, Michael continued, his voice like steel. I was nothing more than a meal ticket and a babysitter while your baby daddy got all the benefits. But just so you know, your ticket's been punched. No more free rides, at least not from me. Emily hesitated, then asked quietly, what about Brian? Michael chuckled darkly. Ah, still worried about your baby daddy, are you? Well, you can tell him this, we live in a state that allows for alienation of affection lawsuits. He's being served as we speak. It might not lead to much, but sometimes it's the principle that counts, don't you think? He leaned back in his chair, his smile turning predatory. And that's just the beginning of his troubles. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, I had a chat with Charles Parker today, Michael said, his tone matter-of-fact. You know, the managing partner at your law firm? I showed him some of the evidence I've gathered and explained how one of his senior partners had been engaging in inappropriate relations with a subordinate. A subordinate, mind you, who just happens to be married to me. Emily's face turned pale. Mr. Parker was understandably concerned, Michael continued, especially about the potential liability this could bring to the firm. Unwelcome attention, significant financial burdens, none of it looked good. He assured me the board would address it immediately. By tomorrow morning, Brian Carter will no longer be affiliated with the firm. What about me? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Oh, Mr. Parker didn't want to punish you, Michael said with a smirk. You're a mother with a newborn, after all. And given your work history, he thought it best to keep you on, at least for now. Lucky you. Emily stared down at the table, her hands trembling. But Brian? Michael's smirk widened. His problems don't stop there. Tell me, Emily, how much do you really know about your lover? His clients? The people he does business with? I don't know, Emily stammered. He doesn't talk about that stuff with me. Michael nodded, his expression dark. Probably for the best. Let's just say his clientele has caught the attention of some very specific federal agencies. Agencies that have ways of making people disappear without a trace. You're scaring me, Emily whispered, tears filling her eyes. And you should be scared, Michael replied, his voice sharp. You should be scared enough to stay the hell away from Brian Carter. Because when he goes down, and he will, you don't want to be anywhere near him. If you are, you'll go down with him. Emily looked at him, her face pale. Who are you, Michael? Really? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the paperwork in front of her. Sign the papers, Emily. End this farce. I've probably told you too much as it is. And by the way, he added, his tone growing even colder, your credit card has been cancelled, and the locks on the house have been changed. Your key won't work anymore. I've also taken care of our joint bank account. You won't have access to that either. But since you've been funneling half your earnings into your little secret account, I doubt it'll be a problem for you." Emily's lips parted in shock. "You've been busy," she said weakly. Michael shrugged. "You could say that." Defeated, Emily picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them. Just as Michael had said, they were exactly as outlined in the prenuptial agreement. With shaking hands, she signed her name on the dotted line and handed the pen back to him. Michael smiled faintly as he took the pen from Emily's trembling hand and looked over the signed divorce papers. The process server, standing nearby, witnessed the signatures, while the woman with him notarized the documents. Once everything was in order, Michael handed the papers back to the server. "I'll make sure these get to your lawyer, Mr. Waters," the server said. "Thank you," Michael replied curtly. As the server and notary left, Michael turned his attention back to Emily. "I believe it's time for you to surrender your rings." Emily's face crumpled. "Do I have to?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I love those rings." Michael's expression hardened. Apparently not enough to stay out of Brian Carter's bed. Tears streaming down her face, Emily slipped off her engagement ring and wedding band and placed them on the table. Michael picked them up and pocketed them without a word. "I believe our business here is concluded," he said flatly. "Concluded?" Emily repeated, her voice rising. "That's all you have to say? What more needs to be said?" Michael asked, his tone unchanging. "Why?" Emily cried, tears spilling freely now. "Why would you do this to me on our anniversary? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" Michael's calm exterior cracked, his voice cutting through her like ice. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to learn you'd been screwing around on me for over a year? Or how humiliating it was to find out Ethan isn't even my son? Or to discover you were with Carter on our anniversary? Don't even start with me, Emily. We're done. Finished. Goodbye. I never want to see your face again." With that, Michael turned back to his meal, refusing to meet her eyes. Emily wiped at her face, her sobs catching the attention of a nearby waitress. "Is everything all right?" the waitress asked hesitantly. "Yes," Michael replied calmly. "The meal is excellent, as always. I'll take care of the check, and I believe the lady will take her food to go." "Yes, sir," the waitress said, leaving to fetch a box for Emily's meal. She returned moments later, placing the rest of Emily's dinner in a styrofoam container. Michael handed her his credit card, paid the bill, and signed the receipt. As Emily gathered her things, she glanced at Michael one last time. "And that's it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's it," Michael said, waving her off without looking at her. Emily stood there, her mouth opening as if to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm sorry, Michael," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. Michael looked up from his meal, his expression unreadable. "On that," he said, "we can both agree. Good day. Tell your mother I said hello." He paused, then added with a faint smile, "Oh, and happy anniversary." Emily stared at him, unable to believe how calmly he was dismissing her. Her shoulders sagged, and she clutched the container of food as she turned and fled, tears streaming down her face. Michael watched her go, then turned back to his meal. A few patrons glanced his way, their expressions laced with disapproval. Michael met their gazes, shrugged, and offered a faint, unapologetic smile. On the outside, he appeared calm and collected. Inside, he was an emotional wreck. 5 years of marriage, gone in the blink of an eye. At least the worst of it was over. The next few days passed uneventfully, though not without difficulty. Michael wrestled with his emotions. He had loved Emily once, and the betrayal still stung. But he knew it was better to handle things the way he did than to give in to the anger simmering just below the surface. Then came the day the pounding on his front door shattered the quiet. Michael was in his upstairs bedroom when he heard the banging. Peering out the window, he spotted Brian Carter's sleek sports car parked in the driveway. He'd had a feeling this might happen. At Alpha One's insistence, Michael had made some modifications to his home, just in case. Taking a deep breath, he descended the stairs and opened the door. Sure enough, there stood Brian Carter, his face red with fury. Before Michael could say a word, Brian shoved his way inside, his anger boiling over. "You son of a bitch!" Brian screamed, jabbing a finger at Michael. "You cost me my job, and now Emily won't even talk to me. I'm going to kill you, you piece of shit." Brian stormed toward Michael, his fists clenched, but he froze mid-step as 15 tiny red dots appeared on his chest, glowing ominously through his shirt. "Intruder alert," blared an electronic voice from speakers embedded in the walls. "Do not move." "What the hell is this?" Brian screamed, flailing his arms as though he could brush away the red laser dots peppering his chest. Before he could process what was happening, there was a rapid, staccato sound, like air rifles firing in unison. Brian looked down, wide-eyed, as 15 darts protruded from his body. His hands moved toward them, but they never made it. His eyes rolled back, and his body crumpled to the floor in a heap. "I don't think you'll be killing anyone today, Carter," Michael said calmly, picking up his phone. He tapped an icon on the screen, and a voice answered almost immediately. "Operator 715463, the voice said. "Clean up on aisle 15, Michael replied, his tone steady. "Copy that," the operator said. Michael tapped another icon, and the automated turrets that had fired the tranquilizer darts retracted seamlessly into the ceiling. Within seconds, the room looked as though nothing had happened. Michael allowed himself a satisfied smile. The new security system had worked perfectly. A few minutes later, a white, unmarked van pulled into the driveway. Several men in Tyvek suits entered the house, efficiently dragging Brian's limp body out. One of the men grabbed Brian's keys, hopped into the sports car parked outside, and drove off. Within minutes, both the van and the car were gone, leaving no trace of the altercation. Michael closed the door behind them and went about his day as if nothing had happened. A few days later, Michael was leaving a coffee shop with his usual caramel mocha when a large man in a dark suit and sunglasses stopped him on the street. "Alpha One wishes to speak with you, Mr. Waters." "Now," the man said curtly. "All right," Michael replied, slightly annoyed by the man's tone but not surprised. He followed the man to a sleek black limousine parked at the curb. The suited man opened the back door, and Michael climbed in. "Waters," said a familiar voice as the door clicked shut. "Glad to see you're out and about." "Good to see you too, sir," Michael replied, settling into the leather seat. "There's been a lot to handle." Alpha One smiled, his demeanor far more relaxed than usual. He placed a firm but friendly hand on Michael's shoulder. "Please, Michael, when it's just us, you can call me Marcus." Michael nodded. "I wanted to give you an update on Mr. Carter," Marcus said, his smile turning sharper. "He's singing like a canary." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's good to hear. He's giving you everything you need?" "Oh, absolutely. He started spilling the moment he woke up. But here's the thing, he's literally singing like a canary now." Marcus smirked. "Those tranquilizer darts in your security system, combined with our little serum, turned his brain to mush. Right now, he's sitting on a swing in a cage, chirping like a bird." Michael blinked. "Oh." Marcus chuckled, then pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to Michael. "Before he lost the ability to sign his name, we had him settle with you out of court. He was so grateful to still be breathing that he agreed to a figure far higher than you'd initially asked for." Michael opened the envelope, scanning the documents inside. "Well, that's good news," he said, setting it aside. "By the way," Marcus added, leaning back, "I'm impressed with that new security system of yours. Now that we've wrung Carter dry, I'm glad you opted out of the .50 caliber chain guns I suggested." Michael allowed himself a small grin. "Me too. I just had the carpet cleaned." Marcus let out a hearty laugh. "Fair point." After a moment, Michael asked, "Have you heard anything about Emily?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his expression neutral. "She's back at work, though Mr. Parker is keeping her on a very short leash." Marcus gave Michael a pointed look. "Did you ever tell her who you really work for?" Michael shook his head. "No, Marcus, I didn't." Marcus nodded, already knowing the answer but appreciating Michael's directness. "Good. That's how it should be." He leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to business. "Once your divorce is finalized, I'd like you to come by headquarters. We have some new assignments to discuss." "I'd like to introduce you to your new partner," Marcus said, leaning back casually. "Partner?" Michael asked, his brow furrowing. "I've never needed a partner before." Marcus smiled, his expression both amused and firm. "Well, there's a first time for everything, isn't there, Michael?" "Yes, sir." "I suppose so," Michael replied, though his tone hinted at reluctance. "That's the spirit, Michael," Marcus said with a chuckle. "I look forward to seeing you then." "Me too, Marcus," Michael said, though he wasn't entirely sure he meant it. The limousine door opened, signaling the end of their meeting. Michael stepped out onto the sidewalk, turning briefly to watch as the large man who had escorted him earlier squeezed himself into the driver's seat. The long, sleek vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic, and Michael stood there for a moment, lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder what Marcus had planned for him, and what this new partner might bring to the table. As the scene fades to black, a voiceover begins. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps the algorithm push this content further, so more people can discover it. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps me keep creating more stories like this for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.